Welcome to the overview of the Advanced Planning Document, or APD, process. This presentation is the first in a multi-part series covering the entire Advanced Planning Document process. Together, these presentations cover all the rules and guidance for state agencies to get the approval and the funding that you need from the Food and Nutrition Service to carry out an information system project. The modules can be viewed independently depending on your needs, but they'll make the most sense when viewed in the order presented on this slide. The processes, requirements, and terminology build on each other in each subsequent module. Finally, there's information at the end of this presentation on how to contact us if you need more information or assistance. By the end of this session, you'll understand how the state's goals drive the process of planning and procurement, and therefore drive what information you'll need to provide to FNS. You'll be able to identify some key project stakeholders and how FNS views their responsibilities. You'll recognize the documents used for planning and for procurement. You'll know what to expect from FNS, and you'll understand the building blocks that add up to a sample planning timeline. Don't worry, you don't have to get it all from this overview. The details are in the other sessions, but hopefully this session will help you become familiar with the terms and processes that you'll be hearing throughout these modules and provide a bit of a roadmap for going forward. The acronyms used throughout these modules are listed here. You'll learn each one as you go along, but it may also be useful to you to pause the video and take a print screen of this to keep it handy as you continue through the session, especially if you're relatively new to the topic. All right, now let's get started. Before you can do any planning for a system replacement, upgrade, or modernization, you have to know why you're doing it. What is the problem you're trying to solve, or the need you're trying to meet? Often, the need is driven by three things. First, the old system is so old, so slow, or so unsupportable that the state is driven out of it by cost or risk. Second, the requirements and demands of the current world can only be met by new technology. The old system may be stable and working just fine, but you can't expand it, integrate it with other systems, share data efficiently, or implement new features like web-based services. Or three, there are new state or federal requirements, regulations, or mandates that simply can't be met by your old system. You have to upgrade to remain compliant. It's not unusual for more than one of these to apply, or for a variety of other reasons to be involved. But the important thing is to be clear on why your state agency or department is looking at starting a project. Next, you need to determine what's the best way to solve the problem. Do you need to completely replace your system, or can your problem be solved by upgrades and enhancements? Do you need a custom solution or a configurable off-the-shelf solution? Knowing what kind of solution you're aiming for determines the scope of the project. You don't want a solution that's bigger than the problem or that doesn't solve it. Once you've determined the scope, you'll look at how to get it done. Will you do it all at once or incrementally? Will you do the work internally or using one or more contractors? Based on the what and the how, then you'll look at schedule, costs, staffing, whether you'll need legislative approval, what kinds of contractors you may need, and so on. Planning a project is the process of identifying those questions, researching the answers, deciding among your choices, anticipating your risks, opportunities, and constraints, and plotting your course. I hope you can begin to see how determining your needs and setting your goals is what drives all of the planning. And the process of planning is exactly what you'll share with FNS to get approval and funding for your project. The process of documenting your plans and sharing them with FNS is called the Advanced Planning Document, or APD, process. At this point, having just heard that we want you to share your project plan with FNS, many state agencies would be asking, hold it, when do I have to do all this? On everything? No, not on everything. There are thresholds for when you need FNS approval. It may be helpful to pause for a moment to clarify the difference between a project and an acquisition, and then we'll specify the threshold for each. These often get talked about as if they were the same thing, when they really aren't. A project is the whole set of activities, including acquisitions, that you may carry out to achieve your goal. A project usually involves several steps or phases, multiple milestones, and a management effort focused on reaching the desired outcome. Acquisitions are just a part of that. They are the products or services that you buy within the scope of the project. The approval thresholds differ for SNAP and for WIC, but in both programs they apply whether the project is an upgrade or a complete system replacement. In SNAP, state agencies must seek FNS approval for any project costing more than $6 million. The threshold for approval of an acquisition is also $6 million. So for example, a state agency might be planning a $50 million project. That would require FNS approval. Within that, the state may plan to hire a contractor for substantial development work costing $25 million. That would require FNS approval. In addition, the state may plan to hire a QA contractor for, say, $2 million. That's below the threshold for approval of acquisitions, so it would not require FNS approval as long as the contract is competitive. If the state hopes to sole source for those services, it would require approval because the threshold for sole sourced acquisitions is $1 million. In WIC, let's say that the state agency is planning a project that will cost $10 million. That would require FNS approval. Let's say that within that project plan, the state agency anticipates hiring a contractor to transfer a system for $5 million. That would also require FNS approval. In addition, the state would like to hire a separate contractor to provide training services for $300,000. That would require FNS approval whether it's competitively procured or not, because the threshold for both competitive and sole source acquisitions in WIC is $100,000. There are a lot of individuals and groups whose input and buy-in can make or break the success of a project. These are your stakeholders. Each of them has an important role in your project. But for this session, we're just going to talk about the first two, the state agency and FNS. Each of us has specific responsibilities to the project and to each other. We're going to walk through some of those responsibilities. We're going to briefly discuss 10 state agency responsibilities. The first one is what we were just discussing a few slides back, identifying the needs or problems that you are trying to address or solve. This is the why question. Before you can plan a project, you have to know why you're doing it. These may be among the reasons why you are taking this training series, to determine the planning and implementation steps and learn how to prepare the necessary documentation to secure approval and funding. Once you've done solid planning, then you'll actually carry out the project according to your plan. That requires strong, active management of the project, including managing the schedule, the costs, the scope, and the risks. There's another session in this series that covers more detail on project management. A strong commitment by leadership is essential to a project's success, so it's an important responsibility of the state agency to ensure active involvement and communication with a project's executive sponsor or steering committee. Throughout the project, the state must respond to FNS requests and update APD documentation when needed. Federal funding rules require that states ensure fair and open competition for all procurements and avoid any conflict of interest during the project. We also have a separate training session that will cover RFPs and the procurement process. Managing your contractors is another critical part of managing your project. It's impossible to keep control of your schedule, scope, budget, and risk without actively managing your contractors and enforcing contract provisions when appropriate. Last but not least, it's the state agency's responsibility to adhere to federal requirements for status reports, state plans, funding process requirements, and policy implementation. The status reports are covered in a later session on advanced planning document updates. And of course, FNS has responsibilities too. As you prepare and submit planning documents, we will review and render decisions on them in accordance with established guidelines and timeframes. We also consider it an important responsibility to ensure consistency nationally by applying policy and process requirements fairly to all state agencies at all projects. During the life of your project, we'll provide oversight and technical assistance when needed to ensure compliance with federal process rules, that the systems meet program policy requirements, and to ensure stewardship of federal funds. Our role is much more than just reviewing documents. Our level of participation is going to vary based on various risk factors, such as the size, cost, and complexity of the projects. So we may also conduct on-site reviews, participate in project calls and meetings, conduct a pre- or post-implementation review to evaluate outcomes, provide training if needed, or participate in acceptance testing. So far, you've learned that this process involves preparing documents for federal approval in order to get federal funding. Now you need to know what these documents are. How many are there? What's in them? When do you do them? Later sessions will provide the details, but here I'll give just a brief explanation of the advanced planning documents that are required by FNS at various stages depending on the project. What must be in them and when they are required may differ slightly depending on whether the project is for an eligibility system or an EBT delivery system, and whether the project is SNAP or WIC. The Planning Advanced Planning Document, or PAPD, is a short document that is prepared to describe the steps and costs associated with the planning phase only. This is just to let FNS know that you'll be undertaking a planning effort and that you are seeking financial support for that. The IAPD, or Implementation Advanced Planning Document, is submitted at the end of the planning phase and in advance of the implementation phase. It's more detailed because it describes the results of your planning, your alternatives analysis, cost analysis, risk analysis, schedule and budget planning, and so on. It includes the major activities of the system development lifecycle that are expected to occur during this phase, including design, development, testing, and implementation of a new system or system upgrades. FNS provides guidance on the content of these documents in our Handbook 901, but the state can submit them in any professional format and arrangement as long as all the content requirements are met. An annual update is needed to either the PAPD or IAPD whenever that phase lasts longer than a year. When significant changes occur and it's not time for an annual update yet, the state must submit an as-needed update. This would include significant changes to the anticipated cost, schedule, procurement approach, system content or scope of the project, and cost allocation methodology. I said earlier that the process is made up of planning documents and procurement documents. We've just covered the planning documents. Now we'll briefly discuss the procurement documents that also require FNS approval. A request for proposal, or RFP, is the document that a state agency publishes to describe its needs, requirements, and expectations, inviting contractors to submit proposals to meet those needs. There are particular federal requirements related to competition, ownership and licensing, liability, and ethics that must be addressed in all RFPs. So FNS reviews these to make sure you're covered. Procurement can be a challenge, so we also try to provide guidance and suggestions to make the process go more smoothly. Please note, for the purposes of these training modules, we'll use the term RFP to mean any competitive procurement vehicle, even though state agencies may use a variety of document names or acronyms to mean essentially the same thing. We review contracts to make sure that the bidding and negotiation process didn't inadvertently result in dropping any of those federal requirements, and to make sure that a state and federal investment is adequately protected by clear and enforceable performance standards. Finally, an emergency acquisition request, or EAR, is in a category by itself. It's a brief written request from the state agency to FNS for FFP, Federal Financial Participation, to allow the state to take prompt action on acquisitions for hardware or software or services in emergency situations, such as a natural disaster in which normal program operations would be interrupted. The full IAPD follows at a later date. Poor planning is not considered an emergency situation, and the use of an EAR is not allowed in such circumstances. There's one more step to bring the approval and oversight process to a close. When the planned project milestones have been completed, the system is implemented, and the final costs are tallied, the state submits one last APD update to FNS. When that update is approved by FNS, the project is considered officially closed. Where should you submit your project documents? The FNS Regional Office is your main point of contact. If you're familiar with the state systems analyst assigned to your state, you may also submit your documents to that person at the same time. It may speed our internal coordination. Depending on the nature of the project, the documents or components of them may be reviewed by a number of different specialists at FNS, both at the regional and headquarters level. But regardless of who you send things to, state agencies can expect a coordinated response from FNS. The state will receive approval or a request for corrections or clarifications within 60 days of submission on most documents. The State Systems Office is the lead on project management and technical issues, cost allocation, procurement, and on the APD process itself. The Regional Office is the lead on program functionality, ensuring that systems ultimately process and calculate eligibility and issuance correctly and serve customers timely. In addition, the WIC EBT branch at our headquarters office plays a key role in the oversight of WIC EBT projects, as well as in funding for all WIC projects. I've mentioned that planning is a detailed process. It takes time to determine your needs, evaluate your options, choose one, and then determine the amount of time, effort, and money it will take to carry it out. It takes time to document your decisions and plans, and most plans probably require both state and federal approval. In addition, you probably already know that some steps, like evaluating proposals and negotiating contracts, take time too. I don't want to scare you or discourage you, but anticipating a realistic amount of time for planning is an important step in developing a really doable project plan. Let's talk about realistic timelines for a project. We're going to break this up into 12-month segments. This slide shows the first 12 months of the planning phase. Let's say that the state agency has decided to begin planning and submits a planning APD to FNS in January. FNS has up to 60 days to respond, and assuming the document is well written and contains all the necessary information, it will be approved. That takes us to March. Let's assume that the state promptly submits an RFP to hire a planning contractor to help out, also in March, and that it too is well written and contains all the required components. So FNS is able to approve it on the first review. That takes us to May. The state agency releases the RFP in June and allows 60 days for bidder to respond. That's important to assure fair and open competition. That takes us to August. This state agency has its evaluation team all lined up, trained, and ready to go, so they are able to review those proposals and make a selection quickly, within the same month. The state submits the draft contract to FNS right away, during the same period that it is under review by the state's own procurement and legal folks. Because the contract is excellent, well written, organized, and covering all the bases, it can be approved within 60 days. That takes us to November. Assuming there are no contentious negotiations with the contractor or no protests from other vendors, the contract can be signed by December of year one. Hooray! Now the state is ready to tackle the planning phase. I won't go into as much detail here. Don't get me wrong, planning is serious business and it takes time. These planning activities will likely take at least 1 year to carry out. But a later session in this training series provides more detail on these steps and the components of the IAPD. For now, we'll just take a summary view. During this year, the state agency will plan the project in detail, determine the system's needs, conduct the alternatives analysis, choose the best solution for your state based on your needs, develop the schedule and budget, plan for project management, risk mitigation, testing, and training, and write the IAPD. If all these tasks go like clockwork, that takes us through year 2. Now that you've done all that hard work, we'll get back to a little more detail. Just like year 1, this timeline is made up of state actions, federal actions, and external actions, like the time it takes for contractors to prepare proposals. And just like year one, this sample timeline assumes that all the state's document submissions are well written, organized, well researched, contain all the required elements, and can be approved quickly. From the time the state submits the IAPD, it takes 60 days for approval, which takes us to March. That is followed quickly by the RFP for the main system developer or integrator. Approval of that takes us to May. It's especially important that this RFP allow plenty of time for contractors to develop strong, responsive proposals, 90 days, so that takes us to the end of July. Let's assume again that the state is prepared and able to evaluate proposals quickly and efficiently, and makes a decision within a month. Now we're at the end of August. The contract with the selected contractor is submitted to FNS in September, and being a terrific, strong document, is approved in under 60 days, in November. The state and vendor sign the contract with no further wrangling and no protests, and woohoo! The state is ready to tackle the real project, building or transferring the system of its dreams. I know, this is a little surprising to anyone who has never planned a project before. Nearly every state agency is looking for a fast track to success, and it's tempting to shortcut the planning process to get there. It's true, there are a few places where this timeline can be compressed a little. For example, an IAPD and an RFP can be submitted at the same time, or a draft contract can be submitted for pre-review while the RFP is open. But by the same token, there are places where the timeline is likely to be stretched. Not every document will be perfect the first time, and may take more than 60 days to be approved. Not every state agency can form a panel, train them, and be ready to evaluate detailed technical proposals in just 30 days. Not every state agency can negotiate the terms of a contract quickly, and not every state agency can get internal project approval at the same time as federal approval. Ask yourself realistic questions about your resources, your team, and your internal processes before attempting to crunch your planning schedule. Then apply the same careful thought to the design, development, and implementation schedule. When you add system testing, pilot testing, and implementation, it's no surprise that a well-executed project takes years. If you don't have time to do it right, you don't have time to start over. You saw that in the sample project timeline that FNS requires 60 days to review documents. Sometimes that seems like a long time to wait for federal review. We try to beat our own deadline whenever possible, but let's do the math. 50 states, and some states have more than one project going on at the same time. Tribes and territories are also state agencies with active projects. There are 2 programs with multiple documents per project. Every state agency's project is important, and they are all on a schedule. It's safest to plan your project time frame with adequate federal review time built in. At least 60 days for each document. We're held accountable for that. Okay, you made it. Let's look back at what we hoped to accomplish in this overview. Do you feel you learned these things? I hope so. But remember, each of the other training modules provides more detail to help you gain understanding and confidence throughout the process. When you return to the training, your next module should be the Planning APD. In addition to these training modules, please visit the FNS Handbook 901 or some of the other great content on the FNS APD website. There is also contact information there for the State Systems Office, or you can reach us through your FNS Regional Office if you need more information or assistance. We know training takes an investment of your time. Thank you for spending some time here today, and good luck with your project.